Welcome, everyone, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the Planning Committee for the ICSS Sunday morning sessions based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our weekly programs are online via Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can sign up at our website, icssmarks.org, to receive weekly email announcements for our Sunday sessions. Today, we have a program on a very important topic: multipolarity, imperialism, and recent developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran, including the current presidential election. We have a highly qualified speaker on this topic. Professor Bahman Azad is a retired professor of economics and sociology. His area of research includes political economy of capitalism and socialism, and has published articles in political affairs and nature and society. And he is the author of the book Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat: Factors Contributing to Dismantling the Socialist State in the USSR, published by International Publishers. Bahman is currently president of the U.S. Peace Council and on the Secretariat of the World Peace Council and the World Peace Council representative at the United Nations. And he is also on the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. We'll have a presentation by Dr. Azad, followed by a short break for announcements, and then have questions and comments from our session participants. So welcome, Bahman, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thanks to everybody for inviting me to participate and share some of my thoughts with you. We are dealing with a very complex topic, and it's not easy to make one presentation about it and come up with all the answers. One thing I should make clear is that I am not speaking on behalf of any of the organizations mentioned. I'm giving you my views. At the same time, I am taking more of an angle from the perspective of an Iranian, which deals with the organization that I've been working with, and actually one of the founders of it, which is what is called 10 Mehr group. That 10 Mehr actually refers to the date of the foundation of the Tudeh Party of Iran. And that is why we call ourselves Mehr Group. Mehr Group came into being after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and when the Tudeh Party of Iran and its leadership turned toward Gorbachev and then social democracy, in our view. And I was, together with my comrades in 10 Mehr, members of the leadership of the party, member of the Central Committee, and we were purged after a long battle within the leadership of the party. We were purged from the leadership, and from that point on, we decided to create 10 Mehr organization to fight these right-wing tendencies in the party. Of course, we did not declare any kind of split or any alternative as being an alternative to the party, but our attempt, and still is in many ways, to correct the incorrect line of the party from outside. So that what I will be talking about today is basically from the viewpoint of this group and not the US movement in general. So let me, I don't know, there's so many interests in different issues, but let me start with this ongoing elections, which I think are one of the most significant elections in the history of the Islamic Republic. And for that, I have to give you a background to bring you to the current moment in order to have a clear understanding of what is going on right now. We are aware of imperialism its domination. I don't have to talk about those things with you. But we know very well that the collapse of Soviet Union, dismantling of USSR, and the collapse of socialist camp actually transformed our world in a way that we're still seeing the repercussions of it everywhere. One of the results of that was the emergence of what all of us are aware of, is this question of the project for the new American century. The beginning around the 1991, 2, 3, 4, that outlined what US imperialism is planning to do for the 21st century. Among the principles or directions that they defined were a few important ones. One was the establishment of advanced guard military bases around the world to expand the US domination, which was based on the concept of total domination, full spectrum domination. That was one. The second was replacing United Nations with NATO as the so-called force for maintaining order in the world. And the third, which was more or less relates more to Iran, is the idea that the US should not allow the emergence of any alternative to the power or challenge to the power of the United States, unitary power of the United States, unilateral. In that, specifically is mentioned that the US should not allow at the regional levels the emergence of any power, any government, any state that would be capable of resisting US plans, policies for domination. This was the beginning of the process for Iran. Of course, the Iranian Revolution actually, by its very success, changed the balance of forces in the Middle East, rearranged the whole area, the whole region, and acted as a challenge from the very beginning to the supremacy of the United States in the region, and of course its ally, Israel. So from the very beginning, the idea of changing the direction of Iran was on the agenda, and it was based on two possible options. One was alternative like what they did in Iraq, that is to suppress it by military means. And the second, if the first one didn't happen, was to kind of recapture the Iranian leadership by their own lackeys and pro-West classes from inside, to change Iran, redirect Iran back to the lap of the West. Both processes were actually going on, as we are all aware. The threat against Iran being one of the 7 countries that were listed for regime change, was going on. At the same time, the efforts were made to bring Iran back economically, at least, to the Western orbit through a kind of new liberal economic policies that the World Bank and IMF pushed on many countries, including Iran. The sanctions, of course, from the very beginning were imposed, although they're not at these dimensions that we are witnessing. But as soon as, if you remember, the first round of sanctions against Iran began with the takeover of the US embassy in Tehran, and that's the starting point of all sanctions. And of course, during Iran-Iraq war, these sanctions intensified in the hope of bringing Iran down militarily. It didn't work out. So it continued, and the focus was shifted back towards causing an internal rift in Iran and moving Iran toward the West. Of course, the war itself tremendously helped the US imperialism to create some kind of a force inside the country that would oppose the Iranian resistance to US imperialism and would side with the West. It was during this war that the merchant capital in Iran, at the beginning, merchant capital, and later on what we call bureaucratic capital, gained power. First, because of the destruction of the economic infrastructure of Iran during the war and the need for imports of all items during the war under sanction, which meant the merchant capital in Iran had the best opportunity to amass huge capital in the process. The same, by the same token, the war itself gave extraordinary power to the bureaucrats at the central leadership of the country. The whole oil income was put under the control of the central authority of these bureaucratic elements in Iran that allowed them to be able to control the national resources of the country. Of course, in the name of war, but many things happened during that process also. What started the whole process of new liberal reorientation was after the war, when these two classes, bourgeois classes, segments of bourgeoisie, who had gained enough economic power that this process of privatization, in the sense that when this happened, the Iranian government, for the purpose of reconstruction of the country from the war, decided to transfer this responsibility to Iran's Revolutionary Guards. So the Iran's Revolutionary Guards, on top of their political and ideological mission, kind of were given an economic mission for reconstruction of the country. And it was through this that all of the privatizations, more or less, were directed towards an elite group within the top levels of Iranian society, I mean, politically and economically, top elite, that gradually took charge of the foundations of the Iranian economy. At the same time, these classes that gained power during the war managed to penetrate the economic, the political structure of the country. The first wave was the takeover of the Iranian parliament by the merchant capitalists, who pushed for even more privatizations. And gradually that transformed into a foreign policy, dual foreign policy on the part of Iran that still continued until Raisi's ascendance or election, which was a kind of a dual policy of economic ties with the West and political challenge to the West. And this was going on for years. But this new liberal economic policy that was imposed on Iran through continuation of the links with the Western capital actually caused a huge class division, class conflict inside the country, impoverization of the country of masses of people, which is still going on, inflations, everything that you know what liberalism does. And Iranians were paying for this throughout these 40 years of this double-edged policy of economic ties while political and military even confrontation with the West. So the radical wing of the Iranian leadership, which was still present, but did not have the economic power, although it had the political and military and security power, continued its anti-imperialist, anti-West policies, especially at the level of the region. We all know Iran's role in supporting Azad against the ISIS and other forces and the United States invasions. We know Iranian government's, in terms of foreign policy, its full support for the struggle of the people of Palestine, its alliance with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and all of those, I'm sure you're aware of. So one side of the Iranian leadership was moving in that direction, and the other side was pushing for closeness with the West based on its economic interests, This duality existed until a few things happened in the world. One was the emergence of China as an economic superpower in many ways, which kind of shifted the balance of forces. Second was the entry of Russia's special forces into Ukraine and the confrontation that started there. And third, as a result of those two, the winds going into the sails of the left wing of the leadership of Iranian leadership, that has started now to take side with Russia. That was the first step. And draw the lines with the West. From this point on, Iran's policy was elevated from a policy of regional resistance against the United States to a global resistance against the United States. And after some kind of periods of confrontation within Iran that led to 8 years of Rouhani's presidency that was based on moving toward the West, finally, the threats of the US, the sanctions and the maximum sanctions that they imposed against Iran because of its position on the international division, moved Iran, or made the leadership of Iran to realize that this both East and West policy does not work anymore, and they have to make a decision as to where they are going. It was for this reason that during the elections, last presidential elections, the government, the state actually purged many of the leaders of the pro-West policy purged them from the list of candidates, and actually had a kind of a planned or engineered elections that led to the election of Raisi to power, to presidency. It was from that point on that Iran's policy became a kind of a uniform pro-East. They never call it pro-East. I would call it pro-South, pro-global South policy. Until that point, there was, as you know, as I mentioned, there was the kind of the duality of power, in a sense, in Iran. It still exists, but not at the political level. Duality of power from the economic power center and the political power center, the two are separate and challenging each other for all this time. And for the first time, which was reflected in the top leadership of political leadership as well. But after the election of Raisi, that duality of power in the political power was resolved, and Iran went full force behind in the direction of multipolar world and became a key player. In fact, as you know, there's no time that the US strategists mention China and Russia without also mentioning Iran. So you can see the role Iran has been playing in this process. Now, of course, the stakes were very high, both for Iran and for the United States on this. And as you know, this whole business of war of attrition against Israel that Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria and others have been pursuing for years kind of exploded into the October 7th action by Palestinian resistance. And it put Iran on a different level again, with its role in full support for the Palestinian people and the actions they took collectively with the resistance front in the region. So this was, in a sense, getting the United States, US imperialism really worried about the whole situation, because it was clear that if this pattern continued, Israel would not survive and the region will be lost. So they decided to do something. And it is in the middle of all this that the crash of Raisi's helicopter occurs. So it is suspicious for us Iranians, of course. The Iranian government did not say much about the real reason behind it or what the real reason was. And it's understandable for us. They don't want to start another round of direct confrontation with Israel. This is what Israel in fact wants, and Iran is not going to fall into the trap. They are saying that we are investigating, and I'm sure they're going to be investigating forever on this, but for a good reason, I understand. But the fact for us Iranians is very suspicious for several reasons. One, there were 3 helicopters, 2 of them made in Russia and 1 of them made in Canada. Raisi was in the one made in Canada. And when apparently the storm came or whatever climate issue, only that helicopter went down. The two other helicopters continued. So if the weather was so severe, at least the other 2 would have landed too. At least landed, not crashed. But they didn't. They continued. That's one. We know from one of the people who were present, passengers of one of the 3 helicopters, who was one of the vice ministers. He said that just before boarding the helicopters on our return, Mr. Amir-Abdollahian, foreign minister, who was on a separate helicopter from Raisi and flew on their way going there in a separate helicopter, was asked to join Mr. Raisi in his helicopter. That's the second thing. It violates any principle of security, and I'm sure nobody that has some understanding of security issues would agree that was the right decision. But who decided that, we don't know. Okay. And third, it has been reported that one of the spy planes of the United States has been flying parallel to these helicopters on the side of the Azerbaijan border, on the other side of it. So the question becomes, Could they have jammed or messed up the electronic system of that helicopter from distance? We don't know. But this is the story, okay, that is being said. And Iranians are mostly suspicious about what happened. But we respect the government for not going into the details of this or trying to do another tit for tat, because as Supreme Leader of Iran said at the time, that we are involved in a war of attrition against Israel and the US and not direct confrontation in a military sense. So I respect that policy, and I think it's a wise policy, and this is being continued right now. But regardless of what the reason or the cause of the crash of Raisi's helicopter was, it put Iran again back on a kind of in a dilemma of how to deal with the situation. Of course, the foreign policy is more or less determined by the Supreme Leader and probably the military and Revolutionary Guards of Iran. And Foreign Ministry has a much less influence on that. They are the executors of the policy, not. The president probably have more say, and as we saw it before, during Rouhani's period, created the kind of duality of power in terms of the foreign policy, in a sense that although they could not challenge the actual official policy, they kept sabotaging it for 8 years. For example, Iran has signed a 25-year agreement with China, strategic agreements, for the Chinese project of creating the Silk Road across Asia. Good part of it has not been implemented. Much of it has stayed on paper. These are the responsibilities of the president to carry them out. The same with a $40 billion deal with Russia for building some infrastructure and railroads for the north-south corridor between Russia and India. Again, they're talking about 25, 30 different agreements signed with Russia and China that have been left on the table, have not been implemented. So, although president does not make the foreign policy, the president and his state apparatus has the power to sabotage, and they did that. And there's a chance that we are going back to that same policy of sabotaging Iran's foreign policy and its position in the multipolar world movement through the newly elected president. So that's a very critical period in our country. And for that reason, combined with what happened to Raisi and all that, now the neoliberal big bourgeoisie of Iran has come together, joined forces, all factions, and put forth Pezeshkian, because they put forth Pezeshkian because he has a good, healthy record, political record before. In the past, he's had it. The neoliberal bourgeoisie of Iran cannot come into the scene through its well-known characters and leaders because people of Iran are fed up with them. So what they have done, they have gathered behind Pezeshkian. And they are running his campaign, they're setting his policies, he's formulating his debates and everything else. They are hiding behind Pezeshkian, who is now quoting Imam Ali and Ayatollah Khomeini and this and that to pretend that they are moving in the same direction as the leadership to gain the power and gain the presidency and then move Iran. Although they are already saying that they are going back to the nuclear deal try to settle the accounts with the United States and all that. But as we know from the demands of the United States about the nuclear deal, after Trump canceled it, that Trump canceled just because it was just limited to the nuclear issue and did not cover Iran's missiles, Iran's support for Syria, Iran's support for Palestine and all that. And Trump, if you remember, put out a 12-point demand to return to the nuclear deal. And that included all of these other considerations. In a sense, Iran's total submission to the Western policy is required for the nuclear deal to go forward. And now these guys are pushing for reviving the nuclear deal. And they're saying all of the problems of the past 40 years that they have had is exactly the result of the challenge that Iranian government has been giving to the United States in its foreign policy. So it is a very dangerous situation in Iran. Now, if you remember the whole uprising that happened in Iran and pushed forward by Voice of America and the BBC and the rest about the woman life freedom movement that caused a lot of turmoil inside the country, they are banking on that too. And they are bringing the question of hijab into the picture. They are saying that these are fanatics, religious people that are challenging the United States, causing all these internal problems and all that, don't respect women's rights or anything, and they are mobilizing, focusing on women of Iran to mobilize them behind this so-called women's rights issue for this pro-West person who is supposedly bringing freedom to Iranian women. So this is the whole story. And all these campaigns are focused against Jalili from this angle. They're attacking him culturally. They're attacking him economically because Jalili was the first negotiator for the nuclear deal who resisted US conditions. And it was only after he was removed that the Rouhani government came in and went through the whole deal with the United States. Now Jalili is being accused of it. This is the person who blocked our freedom from the sanctions and this and that. So they're attacking him from all fronts, culturally, politically, religiously. And thanks to all those campaigns, Pezeshkian, the pro-West candidate, is now having higher vote, although both of them came to the second round of the elections. The battle is very critical, and we are hoping that Jalili can manage to get the election. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster for the people of Iran. I'll stop here. I'm sure there is a lot more to talk about. And I'll be happy to listen to your comments and if there's any questions, answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahman. We're going to have a short break for announcements, and then we'll have a question, comments, answer period for the rest of the time. I want to remind everybody that if you do have a question or a comment, that you should use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and we will call on people, try to call on people, get everybody in to get your questions and try and develop some discussion around this very important topic and very informative presentation. Before we do that, I just want to make a few announcements. Next week, we're going to have Speaker Greg Godels, who will be speaking on the U.S. presidential election and the threat of fascism. Very topical issue. So please come back next week for that session. And then on Sunday, July 14th, we will have a post-election analysis from the Mexican elections that just recently took place. And our speaker will be Jose Luis Granados Ceja. So we'll have some discussion on that. I want to remind everybody that you can sign up for email notifications for our programs at icssmarks.org. And you can also find on our website links to video recordings of our past programs. You can contact us with feedback, suggestions for future programs and speakers, topics, and also to make a donation to support our Sunday morning programs on the website. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to shift over to questions and comments from the audience. I want to remind everybody that this is a comradely forum for political discussion and debate, and we want to ask everybody to respect the our speaker and the moderator in today's program. So I'm going to start with Sharon, then followed by Gulden. So Sharon, if you would please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Bahman, thank you very much. This is extremely informative. You can't understand anything about Iran by reading the Western press, that's for sure, which I've been trying to do. But I wonder if you could say a little more about the upcoming election and why you think, what is it about Jalali's policy that's so important? Because reading the New York Times, he's characterized as an ultra-conservative versus the, liberal reformer, which I understand is completely unhelpful. So if you could say a little more about what are the major issues, and does the public understand those issues? And finally, maybe you could say something about the role of the Tudeh party, because I'm in awe that the Tudeh party has survived and continues to be a voice for working people there. But I wonder if you could say more about where they're at now and their role.
Alan, do you want me to answer each question?
Yeah, we do one question at a time to keep it more interactive. So please go ahead.
Okay, sure. Jalili definitely is coming from religious tradition. It is part of the radical revolutionary movement that brought about the 1979 revolution. He is committed to the principles of that revolution. He has been outspoken representative of the left wing of the Islamic leadership. Of course, he has his own, when you talk about Islamic leadership, you have to deal with also some traditional orientations. Okay, that he, for example, with regard to hijab, he has declared, he has stated that he thinks that this issue should be resolved by a dialogue, not suppression. We should not forget, when the revolution in Iran happened, 90% of women and 60% of men were illiterate in Iran. That number, 85% of women in Iran wore hijab. It was just some westernized islands in big cities that were living like a Western style of life. It wasn't the population. It was that majority that did the revolution. Of course, we expect their views will be dominant in the system. We cannot remove that by decree or by wishful thinking of the left. This has a historical root. You have to deal with historical root. We are Marxists. We cannot deal the battle is not ideological, it's a class struggle. And in that sense, if you come to the level of class struggle rather than ideological struggle, we will see that not only that Jalili is not conservative, he is the most revolutionary one in the process. And that is why some of the establishment itself doesn't like him, because they know he is going far to the left of them. He is, staunch anti-imperialist. And on a no compromise person, in a sense. And they're taking that as a kind of negative, as a minus for him. But let's not forget, since Gorbachev, we communists have become conservatives too. The concepts have lost their meanings. Left and right have switched position. Right? Conservative and progressive have changed. So, of course, they are using their imperialist media to make a black sheep out of him and then get rid of him. Of course they are done. But this is not what Jalili is. This is not his true picture. Of course, he is religious. I agree with that. But for the same reason that the party of Iran after the revolution decided that we should work with revolutionaries regardless of their ideology, today it is the same our position. We deal with them, we work with them, we support them, so long as they are standing against imperialism and calling for social justice inside the country. So this is Jalili. Of course, he has shortcomings. That's why we as communists did not put our name as supporters, as a supported candidate for us. But we have said that if Iran wants to move forward, it should elect Jalili. Because of other limitations, of course, we are Marxists. But we are in full force behind him, and we think that he should be elected. That's the only way forward. Otherwise, we're going to be, it's a different world right now. The battle has become brutal and vicious. And if the right wing wins this time, it's going to be much worse than before. And the left is going to be the first victim of it. We know that. Okay. Now,
Okay, next is Gulden, if you would go ahead, followed by Dave, followed by Jean. So Gulden, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bahman, for your presentation. It was very informative. My question is, in terms of social movements against the government in Iran, for us looking in from outside, it looks like Iranian government interpret as Western interference, Western conspiracy, or Western provocation. How is the Iranian left looking at these movements, and do these movements get support from Iranian left?
Okay, great question. Let me draw a parallel between what is happening in Iran with regard to these movements and what happened in Syria. Remember, in 2011, the people of Syria peacefully protested, came to the streets to demand some adjustments or changes and amendments to the constitution of Syria to allow more freedom of political activity. What happened? Syrian government amended the constitution. When we went there a little bit after that, we saw that 30 different parties are present in the parliament in Syria. But what happened to the demand? Immediately, the West turned it into an armed struggle against the state. Weapons were provided, mobilized from abroad. The peaceful protest in the capital was transformed into armed struggle on the borderline regions of the country Suddenly, there's a problem of partition of the country. Suddenly, Turkey comes in and takes over a part of the country. US forces move in from some other area. You can see that a legitimate demand of the people is hijacked by imperialism and used to its own advantage and transforming the whole issue, the whole initial issue that was the question of that protest. Look at what happened with this movement, the so-called woman life liberty. Women of Iran, well, a woman was, for some reason, died or killed, I don't know, we still don't know, at the hands of immoral guard or whatever they call it. A protest by women started, which was totally legitimate. They protested that death, right? What happened? Suddenly you have a mobilization all around the country, turned into a kind of looting, attacking the guards and the police officers, killing them. Suddenly in Baluchistan, in the border province of Iran with Pakistan, suddenly an uprising starts. In Kurdistan starts. In some other areas, suddenly all of these things appear, right? What happened? The same women who were protesting that went home, and it was all these lumpens on the street attacking the police officers and burning police cars and doing all that, putting fire to whatever, right? I have been asking this from some of the people who raised this question in Iran. If this was a women's movement, have you seen a woman in these videos that they showed killing a police officer? Was that a woman? Is that a woman's movement? I should have seen at least a couple of them beating on a police officer. I see none. All of the videos they have showed are these in those hoodlums doing this. Where did they come from? At the same time, I want to mention this. The Iranian workers, working class, were on a strike in several major enterprises for pay raise, for job security and all that. They announced that they will call off their protests until this issue is resolved. They don't want to be part of that, be identified with that, or being linked with that. The workers stopped their protest, their strike, just not to be identified with what was going on. This is the process. We have seen it in many other countries as well. Syria is a perfect example of that. And they tried to replicate that in Iran. It didn't work, fortunately. Unfortunately, the so-called left of Iran joined that thing. And, unfortunately, as I say, with much regret, the banner of To the Party of Iran was next to the banner of Iranian royalists against the Iranian government about this issue, on this issue in Berlin. A shame. I have the photo of it. So the left has to understand and make the distinction between legitimate demands of people and imperialism agitations, imperialism's interventions to redirect its legitimate demands toward opposition to the governments that resist imperialism. And this has been going on. They're doing it in Venezuela, they did it in Cuba, they do it everywhere. And we have to be aware of that. Thank you.
Next is Dave. If you would go ahead, followed by Jean.
Oh, hi, Bahman. It's a good presentation, and you summarized very well the different classes working in Iranian society. So I gather that the mercantile capitalism is one group, and the Revolutionary Guard the other one, and I'm wondering where's the bureaucratic group fall. So that's one issue, and the other one is like, what mode of production is the Revolutionary Guard pushing? What classes they are backing up? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'm not putting revolutionary guards on the side of merchant capital now, but the process of privatization that is transferring the state responsibilities to entities outside the state was done in the name of transferring it to the Revolutionary Guards. So the whole process was shifted in the name of Revolutionary Guards to the private sector. The ones who benefited from it were the same big capitalists that were fattened by the war itself. They were the ones who took charge of these projects, government projects, that were handed over to the Revolutionary Guard. And of course, Revolutionary Guards at the time did not have an engineering corps or construction corps or whatever, right? They had to contract these things to the private sector. And the same way our Pentagon contractors are working here, right? So that was they used Revolutionary Guard as a medium of privatization to transfer everything to the private sector. And now the same bureaucrats, many of the bureaucrats that were controlling the oil money and everything else, kind of transferred. For the first time in Iranian history, the Iranian oil industry was partially privatized. Petrochemical plants, refineries were transferred to so-called semi-private companies. And through them, economic power was transferred into the hands of big monopolies. We have huge, very gigantic monopolies in steel, in petrochemical, in copper mining in Iran right now. And they rule, and they are exporting because of the smart sanctions of the US that Iranian government, the state cannot export, but the private sector can export. This is a part of the smartness of these sanctions that is really tailored to strengthen the private sector against the public sector in all of these countries. Mm-hmm. So all of these monopolies came to being as a result of this US sanctions that opened the way for the private sector for international deals and closed it to the state. And that also forced the Iranian government to even privatize some of the parts of the state enterprises that it did not want to privatize, was forced to privatize them so that they can operate. Otherwise, they would be shut down. So they forced this on the country in the name of reconstruction, post-war reconstruction. And that's how it happened. Afsanjani was the one who did that. Now, many of these people who are running these private entities, monopolies now, are relatives of the same people who are in the governments. Bureaucratic capitalists that are compiling or accumulating capital through government contracts that they have. This is how it's working right now. The mode of production, I don't think the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is pushing any mode of production. In particular, we know that the dominant mode of production in Iran is capitalist. If you look at all of the candidates, 6 candidates that ran for the election. None of them, including Jalili, openly opposed privatization. So neoliberalism is still alive and strong in Iran. And it is very hard to fight it right now. But this was another debate we had with another comrade here, from Iran, that this neoliberalism has two sides. One is its own internal power. One is its link with international capital, right? That's where it's fed. Now, if you confront this neoliberalism head on, while its navel is linked with the international capitalism, you have a hard time overcoming it. So the first step towards defeating neoliberalism in Iran is cutting its ties to the West. And this is what Jalili is doing. Now, if Jalili was at the same time, we know he is against privatization, but he didn't make it an issue because he knows that by saying that, he is going to deprive himself of support of a portion of the radical wing of the Islamic movement who believes in private merchant capital, who believes in the line, but doesn't want to touch the economy. If he openly said that, he would have lost the support of that capital, right? He's in an election. I don't know what he's going to do afterwards. But he refrained, although we know that he's a pro-labor, pro-worker, pro all that. We know that. He has done it. So we have to wait and see what happens afterwards. We just, at this moment, hope that Jalili wins and cuts our ties from international capital and strengthen the ties with China, Russia, and the global South. If that happens, internally, the neoliberal bourgeoisie will be weakened and we will have a better chance of defeating it internally.
Hey, Jean, if you would go ahead, followed by Polina. So Jean, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. It's great to see you, Bahman, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And, Mark Twain once said that if you don't read the Times, New York Times, you're uninformed. And if you do read the New York Times, you're misinformed. So what's a guy to do in this situation? And I think that's why we all appreciate someone coming in and really giving us a basis for better understanding what's going on. So we appreciate very much your presentation. But I had, I guess, two questions or comments. One was this about this guy, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1953. And he was also really kind of pro-Western liberal person who had the idea that Iran's oil should belong to the Iranian people, not to British Petroleum and so forth. And so United States, this was the first time, I believe, that the CIA actually overthrew another government. It was kind of how we got started in that business. So I wonder what people today in Iran think about Mossadegh and his contribution. And the other question, you did mention China, and I'm kind of a pro-China, pro-Xi Jinping guy. So I'm interested in this because for me, the way I understand China is it's clearly a great power, but unlike most of the other great powers, they didn't attain that power by military means, but kind of almost by the I hesitate to say moral force, but their example and what they're doing economically with the Belt and Road Initiative and so forth. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate anything you have to say on these two questions.
On the question of Mossadegh, you know, he was, in a sense, representing Iran's national bourgeoisie at the time. By national bourgeoisie, I mean the bourgeoisie that resisted foreign domination. And in that sense, he was progressive. But he was doing it at the time when World War had just ended. Soviet Union was at the peak of its prestige. At the same time, wounded and lost 25 million people, and its infrastructure defeated and all that. But that moral prestige, that political prestige of Soviet Union had a lot of influence inside the country. And the West was afraid that success of Mossadegh in doing so will bring Iran closer to the Soviet Union. And they could not tolerate that. The problem was for Mossadegh to rely on the masses of people that supported him. That is, when the threat came, because you know, the coup happened in two consequent times. The first one failed when Kermit Roosevelt called Washington and said, let's forget it. I mean, Washington called Kermit Roosevelt and said, let's forget it. And Kermit Roosevelt said, we can do it and succeed, and he did it the second time. During this time, 2-3 days distance gap, Mossadegh had arrested the leaders of the coup. But let them loose, because he was such a Democrat, bourgeois Democrat. Let them loose. Got some few promises from them not to do it again, and let them go. During that time, the Tudeh party contacted Mossadegh and said, either you bring, they said, please call on the masses of people to come to the streets right now to support you. But like any other bourgeois, he was afraid of the masses of working people. He refused to do that. You know what he said to the party? I'm not going to do it. If you think you should be done, do it yourself. Of course, the party would not do it. With the condition the Soviet Union was in, that was the green light to the US to invade. The party did not do it. But the Mossadegh refused to call on the people to come to his support. And that's why he lost it. Now, Mossadegh is being blamed for doing that. By the same religious forces that carried out the revolution also. Not because of Marxist terms that he was liberal bourgeois or anything, but because he didn't have the backbone to bring the masses to the street, while the religious forces could do it in the revolution. And they don't think that methods of Mossadegh would have worked in this round of revolutionary process in Iran. So of course, some of them, more fanatic ones, more traditional ones, talk about Mossadegh being a nationalist, not a religious person and all that. They have their problems on that ground too. But that's not the significant part. The significant part is that Mossadegh failed to bring the masses to the street, to counter their coup.
Okay, next is Polina, followed by Mehmet. So Polina, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bahman, for such a helpful presentation. I'm wondering if I heard you correctly, you said that the comprador neoliberal forces are rallying behind the candidate Pezeshkian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm wondering about the role of Persian language media in shaping public opinion in Iran. I'm completely unfamiliar with the Persian language media. I follow Press TV and find it helpful. Now, what is I'm just wondering about the control of media, the information spaces, if you could, maybe even social media and our usual friends, the National Endowment for Democracy, and how they tend to fuel a lot of the social media discourse in a particular direction. Thank you.
You are talking about social media in English?
Well, actually, let's just start. My first question was about the Persian language media and how that is, who controls, which forces control that, and how that shapes public opinion. And if you could also comment on social media, whether in English or Farsi,
Okay. In the Iranian domestic internal media in Iran is controlled absolutely 90% by the liberal pro-West wing. And in that sense, I don't know if it's a good parallel, or that has been one of my criticisms about the situation in Venezuela, that they let loose all of those propagandists in the private sector, private media sector, and allowed them to brainwash people. Probably the same thing happened in Iran for past 40 years, that the pro-West liberal media has been dominant in Iran and has been effectively disorienting people in many ways. Of course, the propaganda that they sent to the public is not being consumed by all people. It is actually affecting the middle to upper classes of the society. As you go down the class scale in society in Iran, people become more and more religious. And their propaganda has less and less appeal as you go to the lower levels of society. That is why, if you look at it, the Iranian society is very polarized, very polarized. There's a minority of affluent, middle, upper class people, pro-West, very noisy and vocal. And there is a majority of silent people that, if you look at it, for example, with regard to the crash of Raisi's helicopter, even many, I asked Alan to send you this document that we put out. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's about the Iranian left, which are mostly petty bourgeois, upper class anyway. They all talked about the death of a criminal. That was the title of the article, editorial of To the Party of Iran, the death of a criminal. Okay. And the rest of them, all of them fell for it. Okay. This is what the left and Iranian affluent classes say about Raisi. And look at the hundreds of thousands that went to his funeral. Unbelievable. And that is a silent majority. That is not much influenced by these people. But it is being paralyzed, in a sense, by the economic hardships that is going through, insecurity in life that they have, inflation, unemployment, on all those things that preoccupy them. And they are not as active on the surface politically as the pro-West people, but they are there. And that is what can be relied on, in my view, to protect the Iranian revolution and move it forward. Because at all critical juncture, these masses have mobilized and entered the scene to protect the government and the system, and I think they will do it, as they did in the Iraq War. You know, they worked on the mines, landmines, to clear the Iraqi forces. So they're going to do that. Of course, before it was majority of Iranian people, now it is the oppressed classes of society.
Mehmet, followed by ICSS.
Thank you very much for a really, Bahman, a really great presentation and a lot of information to digest. The world has changed from the time when the Iranian counter-revolution happened. And there we had a one polar, monopolar world, while now we have going towards a multipolar world. And you mentioned it at the beginning of your talk. But it looks like the power in Iran has developed to the monopoly capitalist class. And just following the regular development of capitalism anywhere, it could have been the merchant class, but it looks like they do hold the monopoly at this point, which means that their interests have changed. The way that they look at the future has changed. So in our multipolar world, where do you think their interest lies? Because I see two roads here. One is the Western, the United States, and especially the European road to integrate for their class interest, or now they have been presented with another option which did not exist when they came to power, and that is the China, Russia, that road. Where do you think their interest lies going forward?
Great question again. I think when we look at the classes, we have to understand they're specific. I mean, subdivisions within the bourgeoisie in Iran. Mercantile capital, bureaucratic capital, neoliberal capital, and all those. US sanctions has had a negative effect on many of these bourgeois layers that were dealing with the West. They were making huge amount of money. For example, during Iraq war with, in trade with the West, to import from the West and all that. That avenue has been closed due to sanctions. On the other hand, if you look at it, with the rise of China and economic power of China, influence of China, and the transformation of the whole globe and the global South, we are seeing that the same avenues that are being closed to this bourgeoisie on the West side is being opened on the right side, on the East side. So a good portion of the Iranian bourgeoisie, although pro-East, okay, it's still from its class position inside the country, although it has joined the pro-East movement, it still reserved its position inside the society in terms of class exploitation. So in a sense, they want to maintain capitalism, but they have become pro-East. That is a good portion of Iranian bourgeoisie that is acting that way. The neoliberal side, financial, banking especially, is pretty much tied to the West and doesn't move. So the battle is, if you look at the coalition that is moving the Iranian government to the east, toward the east, consists of certain sections of the Iranian bourgeoisie as well. But they are following that not as a matter of principle, not as a matter of the independence of Iran, not as a matter of any of those principled issues, but because their source of income or profit has dried up on this side and they're moving in the other side. So anytime they find another opening, for example, if Pezeshkian wins, and if they manage to reestablish the links with the West, I bet you these guys also will switch again back to the West. So we are dealing in the capitalist class, a shaky ally in moving toward the East. Some of them, based on their economic interests, are moving in that direction, but you cannot rely on them. That is why the question of class struggle inside the countries becomes critical. Because only by relying on the masses of the working people in the country could this pro-East policy continue and be successful. But so long as it's also depending, not also, but mainly at this time, depending on the military force of Iran and the support of a section of Iranian bourgeoisie, it's going to be constantly vulnerable. And anything can disrupt the process, as this election may well do. That's what we are afraid of, and that's why we are calling for more explicit support in favor of the lower classes of society, expropriation of big capital, ending neoliberal monopoly over the banking system, and all those things. So these are required for the success of that line of foreign policy. And if they don't do it, they're going to be vulnerable for good. And as the battle becomes more fierce, with US imperialism becoming more nasty with regard to everything and meaner and more destructive, probably attacks on Iran and Russia and others will intensify. And when things get tough, then we're not sure if the Iranian bourgeoisie will stay where it is right now.
Okay, next is Raj, followed by Janet, followed by Mary. So Raj, please go ahead.
Bahman, thank you for your presentation. Now, Iranian Revolution, it was the Islamic character of it, was extremely anti-communist, and they killed a lot of communists after coming to power.
Right.
If you didn't believe in God, they killed you, or they imprisoned you. And so it is very interesting that you're saying that in the current context, these Islamic radicals are allies of the people, and everybody else is becoming a stooge of the US imperialism. Because, I mean, Iranian Revolution overthrew US hegemony in the country through the Shah. That's fine. But after that, it did not, it was, as far as I know, they took no steps to control capital, private capital. And yes, it had sanctions. So on the other hand, I see Iran, I'm really amazed at its missile development. It has put a fear of God into Israel, which is backed by the United States. So question is, there are conflicting things going on here. First question is, and the sanctions are there, very severe sanctions. And as far as I know, the only country that completely doesn't give a damn, because it's also very sanctioned, well, there are two countries, North Korea, which I don't think can trade very much with Iran, maybe a little bit, but Russia doesn't care. But the rest of the world does follow the sanctions. And so it puts the communists in a very difficult situation where they have to side with a regime that's anti-communist to begin with in this situation. And so how does this neoliberal thing grow so much? I mean, I got it that they wouldn't allow Iranians public sector to export, and therefore they weakened it, and at the cost of they allowed the private. That I understand. Now that has become a monster that that can eat them up. So it is very interesting. So in BRICS, joining BRICS, are able to bypass some of these sanctions? Tell me more about what you know about these sanctions and fight against sanctions, because it's tied to whether Iran remains outside the control of US. And I think it's very important. If Iran again goes back into the control of US, then it's going to be very difficult. The struggle will become difficult for the rest of the world to overcome this dominance.
Yes, we have to, when it comes to sanctions, we have to recognize two currents in Iran. The radical wing, radical side of the leadership, which is probably guided by Ayatollah Khamenei, has the slogan of neutralizing the sanctions. Raisi's slogan, Jalili's slogan is we should make US regret its sanctions, which is neutralizing it. The other side, the right wing, the pro-West, says we should try to remove the sanctions from Iran. That is the battle that's going on with regard to sanctions. Iran tried to neutralize them. Look what the support they gave with the ships they sent to Venezuela, for example. Okay, that is the policy we're talking about. Neutralize meaning moving toward the east, open the roads and paths that were closed by the West, open similar paths towards the east. If you look at, for example, oil exports that are going, Iranian oil exports, I mean, during Raisi, it went up from less than 500,000 barrels to 2 million in 3 years. If you look at the chart of it, it's all with China. Now, when you export 80–90% of your oil to China, who cares if US is putting sanctions on your? But if you want to go back and ask the US and beg the US to remove the sanctions, it is going to ask you to remove your missiles from Syria, get your Quds division out of Syria, stop supporting and all of that. If you really want to remove sanctions, you have to submit to those demands. Those are two different paths. Jalili is for this path of neutralizing the sanctions. The right wing, the Pezeshkian and his supporters, are for going and begging US to remove the sanctions, which comes with all the kinds of conditions that were imposed for all these times. And they kept Iranian economy hanging for years over this. So these are the things they want to avoid. As to the anti-communism, if you look at this statement that I sent from Tenmer, we have talked about it. The attack did not start with the party and the left. The attack immediately started after the revolution by assassinating religious leaders who were on the radical side opposed to US imperialism. They assassinated Ayatollah Beheshti. Ayatollah Mutahari, Ayatollah Bahonar. Beheshti was the one who had started soon after the revolution a TV debate, series of TV debates with the leadership of the party of Iran to discuss the issues of the country. They assassinated him. So the attack was not just on the left, the attack was on the revolution as a part of it. They attacked the party too. But they attacked and killed and assassinated the same people who we are not supporting.
Who assassinated? May I ask?
The US, the Mujahideen, the US, the Mossad. They were the ones who wanted to derail the Iranian revolution from the very beginning and trying to chop its head, both on the left and the religious side. And they did that. And that's what opened the door for emergence of people like Rafsanjani to move Iran towards the West. Now, for 40 years, this the Tudeh party of Iran devised or formulate the concept of Imam Khomeini and Khomeini's anti-imperialist and popular line based on what he advocated. The people who behind Khomeini supported this line were purged from the government, were purged from the Revolutionary Guards, were purged from all of the institutions of the country after all of these attacks. Concurrent with the Rafsanjani's move toward the West. For 40 years, they didn't have the energy, probably the courage, I would say, to try to take back their positions. But China and Russia changed the whole scene, and now they see some hope with them. And they have come back to regain that path and move Iran back on this original revolutionary path. These are the same people. The people we are supporting are the same people who were the victims of the same first round of attacks also. And that is why we have kind of a blood relationship with them. And we support them. It's not a question of anti-communism. We are seeing within this rank, within this faction of the leadership of the Islamic Republic, increasing tolerance for the left and the communists. We are witnessing that. Our comrades are being interviewed right now in the national TV. Not in the name of Tudeh, but they know they are from Tudeh. So this is gradually coming back. But it's the same, the people who did that first treason are not the same people who are doing it today. We are fighting them. They are the ones who did that, took power for 40 years, and now the ones who were victimized by that first attack are coming back. This is the story.
Thank you.
Janet, followed by Mary. Janet, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Bahman, for presenting and responding to us. I have a few questions.
Sure.
The presidential candidates' names are unfamiliar to me. It's just hearing them, it kind of goes over my head. Would you mind repeating them or maybe posting them in the chat, especially the one, are you supporting Jalili? Is that?
Yes, yes.
And the one that the West is behind is?
Pezeshkian. His name is Pezeshkian. He is a heart surgeon who was a member of the parliament for a while. He's a good man, an honest man. He was not involved in any of these corruptions. That's a plus for him.
Okay.
And because of his good name, it is because of his good name that the right wing has hidden behind him.
Okay.
Pushed him forward as the symbol of its campaign. And he's being taken over by them. So, unfortunately.
Thank you. And it seems to me that the West Asia resistance movement against Israel overlaps with the values of Muslims and the Islamic world, especially when it comes to Hamas and Hezbollah. Can you talk about how Islamism and its moral influence intersects or not with communism or socialism and the class struggle, especially in Iran? And then I have a third quick question, wondering what your opinion of Professor Sayed Mohammed Marandi is.
Well, Islamism and communism, you cannot put them as universal categories, because a lot of people do different things in the name of communism, and a lot of people do different things in the name of Islam, right? To me, what determines the direction each one of them take is the class base of that part, that movement. So the same way, if you look at liberation theology and Christianity in Latin America, it has a class base. It is that class's interpretation of that religion. Okay. So when we cannot say Islam, and people are talking about political Islam, which is a kind of an arbitrary concept and term. I don't think these kind of terms define any of these people. As communists, we look at the class base of that movement and decide whether this is the same class base that we have or not. And whoever advocates the interests of that class, regardless of whatever ideology they use, we are with them, objectively. It's not even a matter of choice. So history puts us along the same lines, the same path, and we go forward. I don't think it's a matter of ideological battle. Oh, this is because they're Islam. This is what imperialism is tries to do. Trying to convolute all these things, putting communism next to fascism on the one hand, and then setting Islam against communism on the other hand, and all those things. These are games that these guys are playing, and we shouldn't fall for them. When our comrade said, anti-communism, they kill communists. My own father was arrested in Iran, tortured, put in prison for several years, and released, and forbidden from traveling abroad. It never shook my opinion or my views of what history demands of me here today. This is not a personal grudge struggle. It's a class struggle. And we move along those lines. And that's what determines for me and for all of us, many of us here, at least Daimler for sure, Denmer. We're thinking in those terms. And today especially, with the battle that has shifted internationally, and many countries are joining, even under the leadership of part of their bourgeoisie, this move. We cannot be ideological about that, we cannot. Anti-imperialism is much broader than that today. And we understand that, and we move along those lines. That's the only way. That's the best choice we have, I think.
Thank you.
Professor Marandi, I have no opinion to provide. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Mary, followed by Capricorn, followed by Richard Wright. So go ahead, John.
Hi, this is John, the husband of Mary. We're sharing the same screen. Alan, I was just going to say that, the attack from the Bulldog yesterday was obviously in the paid of the U.S. imperialist. That's for sure. anyway, I wanted to thank Bahman for the presentation. Especially, I appreciate the last statement that you just made in response to Janet. And let me just go back to 45 to 50 years ago. I was an open member of a pre-party formation organization here in the US. And I worked with the Iranian student organization from 75 onward. And we had a very cordial relationship. It was part of the unity of the third world struggle against US imperialism at that time. And obviously against US imperialism today. And then what happened was in the Iranian Revolution of '79, some of our people came back from the center recently in '79, and in a mass Iranian celebration of the revolution, some of our members started attacking the Tudeh party openly, attack, criticize, and it turned that kind of celebration into a struggle between a few elements who were criticizing the Tudeh and the masses of people that was at that celebration in celebrating the revolution. And I felt that obviously it was a wrong move. It set my relations with the Iranian Students Association back several years. So I felt that that was wrong for them to do, especially at an open celebration of the revolution. What we should have done was to have a private struggle with the Tudeh party people in whatever differences we had with them. And obviously communists need to maintain independence and initiative, but not in a struggle, not in a celebration of the revolution, which is a very popular movement, and against US imperialism, which is definitely the main thing we need to do then and now. Well, anyways, the question I guess is to you is, if you know that at the time, in '79, when the revolution happened, whether the Tudeh party got eaten up by the revolution, by the Ayatollah, or did they maintain a certain amount of independence and initiative in the mass struggle? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. It's a good example. You are right. The Muslim Student Association of Iran, when we talk about the revolution and Islamic ideology of it, as I mentioned a bit earlier, Islam was the umbrella ideology for all the forces that were involved. Not for communists, but for Aristotle. People from all classes were involved. Each one have their own orientation. In that movement, there were also, from depending on their background, a group of fanatic Muslims who were also for the revolution. but at the same time, they had their own views from traditional society's point of view. All gathered together to make that revolution a success. There's no doubt about it. But we should not forget that within that Islamic movement was different tendencies. That is why our party, the party at the time, formulated this concept along class lines of Imam Khomeini's revolutionary anti-imperialist line and pushed that forward. I give you a couple of examples. Let me give you a story that happened to me personally as an example to elucidate this thing. Iranian Student Association in Carbondale, Illinois, where I went to school, was the same Islamic Student Association as you have experienced. During that period, we were lucky that the Carbondale chapter of Islamic Student Association was under the leadership of the faction within the movement that was absolutely adhering to Khomeini's own line, not the broad spectrum. The person who was in charge of that Islamic Student Association, his father was a colonel was ahead of the division fighting against Saddam Hussein's invasion. Okay. He was a respected person, and he was so close to me, and he knew that I was a member of TUDE. And I was very vocal. I had a background on campus over various things as to the person. They respected me and my comrades so much that they invited us only from all forces that were involved in the revolution to every meeting they had, their own meetings, internal meetings. And honestly, I tell you, there was 100, sometimes 50, somewhere 70 people in the meeting. As I entered the meeting, 70 people, 100 people would stand up for me. Okay. After the first year of the revolution, when Mujahideen turned against the revolution, they were attacking us and them on campus. They would slash my tires. We and the Muslim Student Association jointly celebrated the first anniversary of the revolution on campus. Open invitation. The Mujahideen and ultra-left Maoists attacked that meeting, that celebration. Pulled up chairs, started beating everybody. You know what happened? 6 Muslim Student Association members circled me and got hit for me. This is the Islamic Society Association that you are also talking about, and I understand there were tendencies among them, but we were lucky to have that. But you know, after the attack on the TUDE party, what happened? They sent a whole bunch of students from Chicago to come and remove these people from the leadership of Islamic Student Association and replace them. And our relationship was totally discontinued after that. And I saw that friend who was the leader in the student cafeteria. He wouldn't say hello to me even when passing by me. And he, in one quiet corner, he saw me and he came to me and said, Bahman, don't blame me for not talking to you, say hello to you. I am under surveillance here. This is how the revolution changed. The example that was given, that the Iranian revolution did nothing but kill the communists. No, Khomeini's line. They nationalized the banking system. They nationalized all major industries. They established health program for workers. They started the land reform. They kicked out 60,000 US military advisors from the country. They took over, they closed down the Israeli embassy and called it the PLO embassy. Okay. They renamed the street in front of the British embassy Bobby Sands Street. No, they did 1,000 things. It moved forward that way until a certain point where this attack on the leadership of the whole revolution came, and then attack on the Tudeh party came, and the whole thing turned around. We should not forget that time distance between the time of the revolution and during the time, the turning point, actually. If we forget that, we forget everything about the Iranian revolution.
Thank you.
Capricorn, followed by Richard. So Capricorn, and we're getting towards the end here. So let's try to keep the questions down to a couple minutes. So please go ahead.
Hi. So given the geopolitical rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, can you explain the rationale on the part of both countries in terms of agreeing to the détente, and what do they get out of it? So that's the first question. Second question is, how was China able to circumvent, U.S. sort of, how would I say, intervention to be able to pull this off? Thank you.
Oh, heavy questions. Well, of course, states and governments have their own considerations for the decisions they make, and I'm sure there's lots of factors involved in it. So I cannot explain that from the viewpoint of the government, but I can explain it from the viewpoint of the global movement that has started, that is forcing, since the collapse, after the dismantling of the USSR, the countries were forced. In many countries, many states were forced. Of course, Saudi Arabia was from the beginning, even long before that, but were forced to submit to the US, or else face problems. And we know all of these campaigns that went on, bringing down countries, bringing down states and all that. So they knew that they cannot move against the United States. But like a prisoner that sees kind of door half open of the cell, takes advantage of it and leaves. This is what Saudi Arabia and countries like that do. I mean, look, it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's many countries that are reorienting themselves toward the general current, the general trend that is moving forward. And even out of opportunism, they're doing that. But the fact is that the objective realities of the global situation dictates that. And we're going to be seeing much more of that. I think this trend is intensifying one after the other. The other day I heard, I don't know if when the number I heard is correct, that after Saudi Arabia and Iran joined the BRICS, I think it was Russian foreign minister or somebody who said 59 countries are in line to join. Even Turkey, member of NATO, is considering that. So it's a response to the new reality of the world. And I am not surprised that these things are happening. And I think China took a very, very important step in trying to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran together because it has a tremendous impact on the region. It will have. And diminishing of the role of the United States in the region. That's for sure. As to China, how did they pull it off? I have my theories about it. But I think they could pull it off first by rejecting the Maoist theory of socialism. But they did it by moving in the opposite direction. Different mistake also, not mistake. But they had to, if you want to, straighten a nail that is bent to the right, you have to push it further to the left in order to straighten it up. That's how the Chinese did it. And during the period that they allowed total penetration of the Western capital into the country, of course, they paid the price for it, the working class. But fortunately, it was under the control of the Communist Party, and the Communist Party was wise enough to, after benefiting from all that period of development that resulted from ties with the West, to bring back the whole process under control and create a balance and bring the interests of the capitalist class under the control of the state, while letting them do it and follow their own interests, lining up their interests with the interests of China as a whole. That was the genius thing that they did, and I think that's how they pulled it off. You may not agree with it. That's my view.
Okay, next is Richard. Last couple of questions here, since we're getting at the end. Richard, followed by Roger.
Yes, Dr. Azad, I have a couple. I have two things. One's an observation, and the other one's is my real question, if you will. My observation is that you mentioned that a lot of the privatization had been transferred to the Iran National Guard, Revolutionary National Guard. And the observation is that the same kind of translation happened in Egypt. I believe the military there has substantial private interests. That's just a comment. You can, yeah. My real question.
That's true. Pakistan is the same way.
Yeah. My real question is this, and I want to get back to the topic, this global struggle for multipolarity. And you sort of alluded to that during your talk, and that is that we don't pay a lot of attention in our Marxist analysis as to the role of the lumpen proletariat. And I know this is a big chew, but I was wondering if maybe you could talk or give any. Can the left take advantage of the lumpen proletariat, or are they being taken advantage of in Iran? How can they be taken advantage of on the global situation, and in particular here in the United States? I'm not sure I asked it quite right. I hope you.
I'm not in a position to answer that question. But I would only do this because of all the distortions of imperialist domination over these countries. You do not have a kind of a normal class division of proletariat working class. If you look at it, any of these developing countries, probably the true proletariat is 10% at the bottom, and the bourgeoisie is 10% on the top. The rest of the system consists of all these middle various forms of strata, right? Now, when you want to organize that kind of a mass of people, you cannot just go by the book of Marxism on that. It seems to me that the rise of populism is itself a result of this situation. And it seems that a populist approach, Khomeini's was populist. many of these movements, populism, it can be populism of the right or populism of the left. But you know, I'm not categorizing it as something negative. But what I'm trying to say is that certain other mechanisms have come into the picture that we should take account of and consider, especially related to what you call the lumpoproletarian. Yeah, that is my general, uninformed response.
Okay, last question, Roger, please unmute.
Well, thank you, Bahman. This has been a very helpful and useful discussion, and really appreciate you coming back to the library and joining us once again. I have kind of a summary question, ask you to wear your other hat. You've been speaking mainly as an Iranian and Iranian activist, but you're also one of the leaders of the U.S. Peace movement and U.S. left movement. So I'd like you to maybe comment a little bit about how the issue of Iran is addressed in the U.S. left, how it fits in with the question of anti-imperialism, and particularly about the issue of the Hajib and how that's been handled in the United States and how it's been used on the left within the U.S. movement. So that's my question.
Roger, as my dear colleague in the Peace Council, you are well aware that the U.S. peace movement is not a unified, singular entity or movement. We have various divisions within it. One between the anti-imperialist wing of it, the social democratic wing of it. Then there is a liberal wing of it. All of them are against war, against tension, against killing, against all that, or for peace, but they are all for different reasons. And we cannot say what is the position of the or status of the Peace Council, peace movement in the US. We have been fighting to bring the anti-imperialist approach of the peace movement to the fore and try to kind of mobilize the peace movement in the US along anti-imperialist lines. But this is not possible because, again, based on which class orientation these movements come from, they have a different picture of the whole reality of the situation. The liberal wing is, of course, influenced by liberal principles, among which is individualism, freedom of individual, and individual choice. And obviously, when the issue of hijab and forcing it on women becomes the issue, that is an absolute no-no for a certain section of the US peace movement. It has been the case, you know, when we originally, if you remember, when we were talking about starting the Hands Off Syria coalition. And we called on the peace movement to join us in this. Another side of liberalism came up. Dictatorship versus democracy. Okay. Well, Assad is a dictator there. US is bad on this end. Aggressor. Both are bad. We don't want to take position. These are aspects of the peace movement that we have been dealing with. You know, they are the same people who are not willing to support Venezuela, who are not willing to support Iran, are willing to support Cuba because it's more clear-cut for them. But when it comes to all these superstructural, philosophical, theoretical, cultural stuff, they are influenced by the Western media. They are influenced by establishment media. And that is the battle we have been fighting all this time, and I don't know how to overcome that, but we are trying. I don't know if I'm answering you or not, but it's a big issue that we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank Bahman for a tremendously informative and insightful presentation. Learn more from your presentation and the discussion today than in many hours of trying to ferret out what's going on in the mainstream media and even on the left media, to be honest with you. So this was very good. I thought the quality of the questions from participants was outstanding today. It was really pretty remarkable. If even in our little corner of the internet, I think that that's something that we do very well here. Even though we may not have followers in the millions, we have very high quality participation and sessions. Invite everybody back next week to our session on election and fascism. Going to be a very interesting session with Greg Godels. Go to our website, ICSSmarks.org. Sign up for our email notification list. Contact us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. And again, I want to thank Bahman for coming, and let us know when you're ready to come back to present again. So thank you, everybody.
Can he post his email address in the chat?
Yeah, if you want to post some contact information in the chat, please go ahead and do so before we exit.
Certainly. And I want to thank you all for being patient with me and allowing me to just open my mouth and say whatever I want to say without concern, because we are all comrades and we at least operating on the basis of the same principles. And that makes life a lot easier when one is talking. So I thank you again.
It was a thrill to be together with you.
For me too. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Thank you.
It's an honor for me to be among you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.